Have you ever felt completely uncertain if the choice you're making for your child is the right choice? Have you ever yelled at your child, lost your cool, vowed you'd never do so again, and then found yourself doing it again a few days or weeks later? If so, I want you to know we have all been there. Every parent has been there. When we become parents, it causes us to be under immense pressure. We feel that pressure because we care. It doesn't have to harm us. Pressure can be good. It can be motivating. After all, pressure makes diamonds. Welcome to the Parent Doctor podcast. I'm Dr. Marissa Caudill, an adult and child psychiatrist, wife, and mother of two. If you're here, I'm going to guess that you're like me. You want to be the best possible parent for your children. You don't want to settle for just being a good enough parent. Maybe you're like me and that you're determined to be a cycle breaker within your own family. Here at the Parent Doctor podcast, I blend neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality to give you the tools to confidently grow as a parent. Because it's not just about raising our kids. It's about reflecting, evolving, and becoming the firm but loving parents that our kids need to thrive. I believe in the power of intentional, mindful parenting to help our children see our lives as examples of a life worth living. That might mean making some tough decisions in your life about your relationships, your work, your friendships, your habits. Can that be hard? Yeah, sure. But anything really worth doing is not easy. And that is how we're going to reverse the teen mental health crisis our kids are facing. By leading with love, embracing failure, modeling resilience, and creating homes filled with understanding and connection. So whether you're a seasoned parent or just starting this incredible adventure, you are in the right place. If you find value here, I'd be so grateful if you could follow, rate, and share this podcast. It's a simple way to help more parents discover the support they need on their parenting journey. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Hello, hello. All right, today I'm going to be talking about the origin of the Parent Doctor and how this hero's journey came to be for me. If you haven't listened before, I'm Dr. Marissa Caudill. I am an MD, PhD, double board certified adult and child psychiatrist. I am a wife and a mom of two kids who are 7 and 12, and I started the Parent Doctor a couple of years ago as this idea that I need to do everything I can in this lifetime to reach as many parents as possible and to convey in an engaging and digestible way all of the knowledge that I've acquired as a child psychiatrist and as a mom. And I think I'm uniquely equipped to do this in part because of my own experience. And that's what this episode is going to be about, talking to you in a very open and vulnerable way about my own personal experience growing up as a kid in my family, what I know of my parents' experience when they were growing up as kids and their family, and what I know of my grandparents' experience growing up as kids and their family. Of course, each generation back, the reality of what I know is less and less, but I can fill in the gaps from understanding all the patterns that I now see in all the thousands of patient stories that I've heard as a psychiatrist over the last 17 years. So let's begin with my life and my early days. I was born and raised in New Hampshire. I'm the oldest of two daughters born to my parents, and they got married straight out of high school. This was the 70s, what was done back then, according to what they told me. And my mom really wanted to have kids right away, but my dad wasn't quite ready yet. And one New Year's Eve, I was conceived when he was perhaps a bit under the influence and not quite aware of the details of what was going on. So I was born in 1977, and the situation was that my dad was a reluctant 23-year-old father, and my mom was a very happy 22-year-old mother. But they were very young. But back then, even at 22, 23, they had a little house they were renting. The times were different then, right? Millennial kids right now, young people, young adults, I shouldn't say kids, but it's very rare that they can be 22, 23, renting a whole house with jobs without college degrees. My parents basically graduated high school, and with their desire to work, they got jobs that were pretty good jobs, and they were able to afford a house and afford children at that point in time. So that's how I came into the world. And my dad had a problem with drinking, which I didn't know as a child because my mom basically hid it from us. We had a very early bedtime, and he mostly worked second shift. So he would come home at 11 p.m. after we were in bed, and he would be sleeping in the morning. So as we were getting up and going to school, we'd have to be very quiet because daddy's sleeping. He was probably also hungover, but again, I didn't know that. So then I think when I was somewhere around 10 to 12 years later, I found this note, but my mom gave my dad an ultimatum telling him, stop drinking or I'm leaving you. And he did, to his credit, but he was basically a dry alcoholic for my teen years. And then he and my mom separated as soon as I went off to college. So they did the best they could. They were absolutely good enough parents. They loved me and my sister. They gave us everything that we needed. They cared for us. They loved us. They did everything they could do, but they weren't the best parents they could have been. And that is why I became the parent doctor, because I really want to help as many parents as possible understand who they are and why their responses to situations, whether those are situations their kids bring up, and our kids certainly do cause us to have a lot of tension and reactivity because they evoke often some kind of unfinished business from our past in an unconscious way. And I think if we put in a little bit of effort, we can find out what that is and become the cycle breakers to stop problematic patterns that might be going through generations within our family. So going back even a little bit farther to my grandparents, what I know of my mom's mom is that her own mother, so this would be my great grandmother in the 1920s, again, so my grandparents were born in the 1920s. They lived through the Depression. Their parents were really struggling. And I know that my great grandmother called her brother and said, basically, I'm turning on the gas, like she was threatening suicide. And in response to that, her brother took my grandmother and adopted her when she was young. So you can imagine that her own experience in life was pretty hard to make sense of, I would imagine. Again, I don't know the details, but I know that if you're a kid and you're growing up with one or both parents, and then all of a sudden you're shipped off to live with an uncle that you don't really know that well, it would be a lot for your young brain to make sense of. And that's what happened to my grandmother. And then my grandfather, my mom's dad, his mom was married to a man who was an alcoholic and abusive. They divorced and she raised her sons alone. And again, this was back in the 1920s. So this was not very common. She did the best that she could. And my grandfather was a very stoic guy. He had been a soldier in the Korean War. He came home and experienced hearing loss. So he was basically deaf, but he was a hard worker. He came back from the Korean War, got married, and he and his wife, as a good Catholic couple, had 6 children in a short time span. He worked 2 jobs. He was never around. She was there with the kids. And this is back in the 50s and early 60s when there were no iPads. They barely had television. My mama remembers getting their first TV. So my grandmother's life was very different. My grandfather's life was very different than my life is, right? And they did the best they could. And they also were good enough parents. All of their kids are okay. They made it through. They got married. They had kids of their own. But could they have been better parents with the right support? Absolutely. And so that's really my mission, is to be the parent doctor for everybody in today's generation that could use one, to help us understand, like, how do we do better than good enough? It's not hard to be a good enough parent. Okay, yes, it is hard. Parenting in any capacity is really hard. But most of us with effort can do a good enough job. We can make sure that our kids make it through their childhoods intact, with enough love and enough food and enough shelter and enough caring, that they are alive and functional adults, right? Most kids are going to survive to adulthood. So in that sense, we can all be good enough parents without too much extra effort. But by putting in a little bit of extra effort in terms of desiring to know, what is it that makes a parent the best possible parent? Like, what are the attributes of a parent whose kids then, according to research, grow up to be good social people with good social skills, good emotionally regulated adults, performing well enough academically, and less likely to have problems with substance abuse? Because we do know that people who have significant emotional difficulties tend to develop substance use problems, like my dad did. And I think all of us want that, right? All of us at least want a child who doesn't have problems with addiction, who does well enough academically and has enough drive that they find something to do with their life, some kind of work that is purposeful, meaningful, and hopefully lucrative. And we want our kids to have emotional strengths and the ability to regulate their emotions. And we want them to have connectedness to others and social skills so that they can have friendships and deep trust and connection with other people. We all want that. I know we all want that. And the reality is that there is strong research going back to the 1970s with a psychologist by the name of Diana Baumrind that shows us that there is, in fact, one style of parenting, or at least there's one thing in common with the parents whose kids then grow up to have those good social, emotional, academic, and less risk of They have all those good skills, and then they have less risk of substance use problems as well. And that is parents who are both firm and loving. Her research basically put parental behaviors and attitudes toward their child rearing in one of 4 categories overall. There was firm or permissive, and loving or hostile, kind of on 2 intersecting axes. And you can imagine even a square divided into 4 squares. And each one of those could be one of 4 things, right? Loving and firm, or loving and permissive, and hostile and firm, or hostile and permissive. And really, if you're listening to this podcast, I know you're already not hostile and permissive, because those people don't care enough and invest enough time in their parenting that they would be listening to the Parent Doctor podcast.
Are you a parent who wants to read all the parenting books, and you have maybe a growing list or stack on your nightstand, but somehow you just never seem to find the time to get to them? If so, I totally relate to you, and I want you to know I'm here to help. Every month on the 3rd Wednesday, I read, summarize, and present a parenting book that I have chosen that I think is a great one. And I do this via Zoom. If you'd like to get into the Empowered Parent Book Club, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. This is totally free. It's a public service that I provide. And everyone who signs up gets access not just to the replay in case they can't make it to the live Zoom, but also to an actionable PDF that I create custom for each book that we read. So I would love to have you. This is a growing community now of over 200 members. These are like-minded, engaged, energized, supported parents who want to be more empowered for the sake of their kids. If you'd like to join us, again, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club. See you there.
So you already are probably not in that category. Congratulations. And the other 3 categories are all good enough parenting. Okay. And so we can split hairs and point fingers and say, you're doing this wrong or that wrong. That's not helpful. What is helpful is understanding how we can all more often, with the words that we say and the things that we do with our kids, be hitting the mark that falls in the firm and loving category. Because in reality, none of us are 100% in the firm and loving category all the time, or 100% in the permissive and loving category all the time, or 100% in the hostile and firm category all the time. In general, though, what I have seen as a child psychiatrist is that high-achieving parents, first-generation immigrant families, Asian families especially, who are first-generation immigrant, tend to be more firm and hostile. They tend to have high expectations, and they view that as, I expect this of you because I love you. That is the way they show their love. It's not necessarily bad. It's good enough parenting, but it can be better. Permissive and loving tends to be, not always, tends to be millennial parents who want to be gentle parents, and they think that is the most loving and best parenting style. And that means they're permissive and loving. But the reality is that in terms of outcomes is actually worse than hostile and firm. So that's surprising for most people, because I think most people view hostile and firm kind of old school parenting, this idea of kids should be seen and not heard, do it because I said so, don't talk back to me, don't use that tone. That kind of hostile and firm parenting actually is associated with better outcomes in adulthood than the permissive and loving parenting, gentle parenting style. But the best by far, okay, and it's a distant first place, it's not close. The best by far is firm and loving parenting. What does this mean? It means we have strong boundaries about what's okay and what's expected as parents for our children. We don't just let them decide when they're going to go to bed, how much screen time they're going to have, what they're going to eat, whether or not they're going to do their homework. We encourage them to have autonomy over those things and to develop the skills they need to do those things well in a certain direction. But we maintain a boundary of expectations because we understand that children's prefrontal cortices, the part of their brain that helps them plan and execute things, is not yet developed. And so we have to be that scaffolding for them. And that's why we have to be firm. So what does that look like? What is a firm and loving parent? A firm and loving parent is someone who doesn't do everything for their child, doesn't try to make every kid's mistake something that doesn't cause them pain. We just let them know, I see you. I see that you did your best. How do you think you can do it better next time? We let them learn from their mistakes. And we run a tight ship, right? You want to run a tight ship. You want to have expectations, have structure. Kids really do benefit from structure. Personally, I've known several families who, for whatever reason, they really dislike the idea of structure. They don't like telling their child when they should go to bed or when they should eat. They feel like a kid should just be free to do whatever they want. And I don't think that is right. What I can tell you is from evidence, from studies of thousands of kids and families, we know that the kids whose parents impose some degree of structure, impose some degree of expectations of behavior, they are more likely to develop strong social skills, strong emotional regulation skills, achieve better academically, and have a lower risk of substance abuse problems in adulthood. That is really where the parent doctor is born, because I think even as someone who has all this training and experience, right, as a child psychiatrist, I have over 18,000 hours of supervised clinical experience, lectures, all of this stuff over the years and years that I was a fellow and a resident, never mind medical school, all of that. It was a long time. It was a lot of reading. I did extra stuff after that. And then I have all of my years, 17 years of clinical experience where I've assessed and evaluated and diagnosed and treated thousands of kids and their families and their parents. And I can see patterns in that. And what I know is that we can always do a little bit better. And by examining it and being curious about it and trying new things, we can almost always come out more ahead than we would if we did nothing. So that is why I created the Parent Doctor, not because I want to be famous, not because I want to be making millions of dollars, but because I really want to convey the information that we have in a way that is useful to people. And I know that now podcasts and social media, it is just where we are at. It's where we're getting our information. And that is why I created this platform. That's why I'm working with parents. So if this resonates with you in any way, if you want to be a cycle breaker for your family, there's just so many reasons. And I'm sure you can think about your own parents and their parents and the stories that you've heard. There's so many reasons that a loving parent's love can become somehow diverted from their child, that the child won't feel all of the love that the parent has for them. And that's a shame. And I think as the parent doctor, my goal is to help you find out what are the ways that you might be having your love diverted, and how can you open those pathways to give your child all your love, even when it's hard for you to do so based on your own past experience, and set them up to have had a parent who's better than good enough so that they can then go on in the world and do more good. So I view this work as really my life's purpose, because it's going to have such a big ripple effect. Like for every parent that I can help build a strong, lasting, flexible, but durable connection and trust with their child that'll last through that kid's adulthood, every parent that I can do that with, it's going to have infinite effect, because that kid then is going to have a better chance of being able to do that for their own children and their children for their children. So it's just going to amplify exponentially. And I also am really committed to this because I know that for families that are in crisis, like my grandparents were, like their parents were, and like millions of families in America right now are, when you're struggling with basic needs, like where's my next meal for my children going to come from? Or am I going to be able to stay in this housing situation next month? When you're struggling with those basic needs as a parent, your brain's survival connections are on overdrive. And it's very hard when you're in survival brain state to use any of the information that I would be teaching. So 20% of the net profits from the Parent Doctor are going to be going to organizations that support families who have children who are in crisis, especially single mothers, because these families make up the majority of people who are living under the poverty level in America today. So I am very committed to feeding these families, to giving academic support and supplies to these families, to giving education to these families in every way that I can as I grow. And I promise you, from day one all the way forward, 20% of any profits from the Parent Doctor's sales of courses and educational materials and all of that is going to be going to these kinds of organizations. I've already found some that I love, but if you're listening and there's an organization in your community that you love, then please message me, email me at hello@theparentdoctor.com. Give me that information. I would love to hear about more places where we can be of service, where the listeners are. So thank you for listening today. I hope that this episode was useful to those of you who are listening. And yeah, get jazzed up about being a better than good enough parent. If you don't know, that term good enough parenting comes from a psychoanalyst by the name of Donald Winnicott. And he's also the person who coined the phrase transitional objects. And yeah, he was a very well-regarded and respected early psychoanalyst who did a lot of research and observation of kids and parents and how that relationship evolves over time. We know what it takes to be a good enough parent. If you're listening to this, I know you already are a good enough parent, so good on you. But I also know that you're here because you want to be more than that. You want to be more than a good enough parent. I do too. I want the best possible relationship with my kids. And I love my parents so much, and I'm so thankful to them. I know that they did the best that they could. I'm trying not to get emotional here, but I also know that they could have done a lot better if they'd had someone like me supporting them a little bit along the way and letting them know that I believe in you. So that's my story. And I'm sending all my love, wishing you the best, and stay tuned because this month I met some really awesome people who are parents who are all doing really cool work. And I'm going to be interviewing them on the podcast coming up here. And there's a story of a single dad who's now raising his 10-year-old daughter by himself. There's another story of a woman who really overcame a lot of difficulty from her own childhood. And then I'm going to be talking also to a dad who, like me, is extending himself beyond his comfort zone in the online course space to reach dads and inspire them to really step up to raise the next generation of sons. So I'm really excited to talk to all of these friends. You'll hear more about those episodes in the weeks coming up. Stay tuned. And if you are still listening, please be sure to recommend this podcast to a friend if you find it helpful, share it. And then if you can subscribe, follow, whatever it's called in podcast terms, I don't know, but rate it. All of those things will help us to get more listens and in more ears. So thank you all. Sending you love. Have a great day.